Hello and welcome to Red Red. Today I'm talking about Botchan by Natsume Sōseki, and this is a short book, so I might not have too much to say about it, but I read this book because it was gifted as the April mystery book from my 2023 mystery books video, which you're welcome to go and check out if you want to guess what some of the upcoming books are. I recommend it actually because the upcoming May book is the first book of the series that I don't know what it is, or I haven't been able to decipher based on the guests, so it would be cool to get some suggestions. This is also the first Sōseki that I've read, and I didn't realize that he was quite an earlier writer than some of the other Japanese authors that I have read, like Mishima, but also Kawabata and Kobo Abe. And I also didn't realize that this book is so popular in Japan. It is sort of a kind of school textbook, and I believe, as per the introduction, this book was translated by J. Cohn. I'm really sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right. Cohn. Cohn. But he talks about how the book has maybe in a similar way adopted a similar prestige as the Catcher in the Rye for younger readers. But because it is a pretty solid book, it also survives being a assigned text in school, which is its own discussion, I think, and that's really cool to think about. Books, kind of maybe 1984 is a similar book that is often an assigned book for us in the West, but also happens to be a good enough book to warrant rereading and to survive being analyzed and dissected. But to talk about Botchan, basically, the story is, I think it will surprise readers at how colloquially it is written and how easy it is to sort of sink into this world and to follow this main character, Botchan, who comes from this family that has sort of always criticized him for being a bit not very, I guess, smart, but also just sort of strong-headed. And I mean, let me just read the first line, which is interesting, and I'll come back to it. But from the time I was a boy, the reckless streak that runs in my family has brought me nothing but trouble. Once, when I was in elementary school, I jumped out of one of the second-story windows, and I couldn't walk for a week. Some people might wonder why I'd try such a daredevil stunt. It's not as if there was any special reason. I was just sticking my head out of a window in the new school building one day, and one of my classmates started making fun of me and saying that even though I acted tough, I was really a sissy, and I would never jump out of that window. When the school custodian carried me home on his back, my old man was furious and said that he couldn't believe that somebody couldn't walk just because they jumped out of a second-story window. I told him that the next time I tried that jump, I'd walk away from it. And so then it goes on to telling some more stories of his recklessness, and eventually what happens is just that there is the older son, the one who is more favored. He goes on to study and gets like a good job. After Botchan's parents pass away, they kind of leave a kind of, I guess, I couldn't really figure out how much it was based on the time and adjusting for inflation, but the way Botchan talked about it, it was like an inheritance that was probably enough to live for a few years, but not enough to really start a business, even though that's what the brother said that he should do. And they more or less disown him. They just don't want to talk about him, or they don't want to associate with him. There is a character who has a solid relationship with him, Kyo, who is the kind of housemaid, and she's quite an older woman, and they have an interesting relationship where she becomes a sort of surrogate mother figure because Botchan's mother died when he was quite young, and she does come back into play. But anyway, to kind of finish off general plot stuff, Botchan just sort of goes through life. He eventually ends up studying at an academy for physical sciences just because he's walking past the door and he sees that they want students, so he goes in and he studies mathematics for like 3 years, and then he gets sent out to a sort of unnamed town, but it's far away from Tokyo, from which he's a native, and he's going to become an assistant mathematics teacher at this place. He meets some characters and through the faculty, and really the core of this book is Botchan learning about sort of political actions within systems or within smaller systems and workplaces, and trying to deal with the fact that he's a very calls a spade sort of guy. He's willing to admit something when it's wrong, when he's wrong, and if he does something wrong and he's caught, he's happy to just say, yep, that was me. And he starts to realize that not everybody is like that, and it's actually really actively to his detriment that other people are not like that, and that they will take advantage of him. And so things that he sees is, he would be more than happy to say like, oh yeah, I did something wrong, but when he points out that another teacher did something wrong, there's all of this web of just sort of lies and deceit and cover up and justifications and so on and so forth, that he really has a hard time with. And there's this big, I don't know if I'm using this correctly, but there's this Spannungsbogen of like this drawer of the bow, where there's this tension that's built up throughout the book, where he's often talking about the fact that he can sort of solve things just with a good thwopping, like with physical violence. And there is this party scene that comes up where it finally just boom, and he just hits somebody, and the book, it kind of comes out of nowhere and you're a little bit shocked by it, but nothing happens really until the next day, and sort of like events start to pour out of it. And I thought that was a really cool method of the fact that he's so often talking about how, we can just get into a fight. I'm not very good with words, but I can stand by you if we need to rumble. And then there's just this building tension of like, is anything going to happen throughout? So yeah. That's general plot of the book. Basically, it gets to the point where he does try to call out some of the things, but him and another friend, another teacher who's also a Tokyo native, eventually just decide that they need to resign and leave and go back to Tokyo. And from my digging and looking around, this book is a bit of a commentary from Sōseki talking about the modernization of Japan and the loss of some of the traditional Japanese ideals, which would later be explored a lot by people like Kawabata and of course Mishima, But I think it was really funny because when you read Snow Country, you get this impression of what a modernizing Japan is like from a very impressionistic perspective, but you almost get a different sort of in the ground, in the trenches perspective from Botchan, which was quite a different approach. So yeah, I'll jump through because even though I have a couple of tags in the side of this book, a lot of them are sort of plot points. They're not necessarily, it's hard to find standout phrases in this book. It's really just that you dive into this vernacular of Botchan and you enjoy, some of his comments, you enjoy the way he describes being in these social dynamics with these teachers. And so the voice and the prose style is probably what makes the book last and be such a great read for so many people in Japan. But I'll just dig through and see if I can find anything that I wanted to talk about. I guess there's the first line that stuck out to me sort of like a sore thumb, and I was looking out for it, but it never quite came back. From the time I was a boy, the reckless streak that runs in my family has brought me nothing but trouble. And the that runs in my family is the thing that stood out to me, because I was like, we don't get any other references to family being reckless, very textually. His brother and his father sort of disown him, and we don't learn anything else. We don't learn any other examples. And I think that the runs in my family is really just going back to talking about the tradition and talking about the bloodlines, and that does come into the play later on, where he talks about coming from being a Tokyo Edoko native, I think it is, and just that this is we have a more noble, not more noble, I guess, or maybe more noble, I don't know, but they have a strong noble bloodline, and talking about these ideas of Japanese, maybe nationalism and imperialism, but just responding to that. I thought it was really interesting that he said the reckless streak that runs in my bloodline, that runs in my family, rather, and it never comes up textually in terms of other family members who have this reckless streak. So yeah, let me know if I'm onto something, or if that's something that is maybe a bit different. And something that I highlighted about Kyo, the maid, she talks about, she praises him. She admires his sort of attitude, because she used to come from a family of nobility, but because of the way things turned out, she ended up having to become a maid and worked. And so after he goes through talking about this, he just summarizes and says, in those days, I didn't have the least interest in things like owning a house, Western or Japanese style. It wasn't something that I had any use for, so whenever Kyo started in on her fantasies, I would tell her that I didn't want any of that grand stuff. Then she would praise me again, saying that it just showed how unselfish I was, what a pure heart I had. No matter what I said, she could always find some reason to praise me for it. And so that sort of highlights or maybe demonstrates this idea where she just wants to see these traits of this sort of Japanese idealism showing up, and it's more a reflection on her that she's highlighting them, rather than a reflection of the fact that Botchan demonstrates these ideals. The teachers and the faculty at the school, he famously gives them nicknames, so like Red Shirt and Badger and Hanger On and so on, and Pale Squash, I think is another one, and he starts to just see them, make value judgments on them, and says, how could anyone respect the power of people like the Badger and Red Shirt? And he's starting to learn that power it can be an intellectual thing, and it can be a political thing, and it's not always just being an upstanding person or being physically ready to fight or dominate. Not only from the teachers does he experience this, but also from the students. He finds that the students really just are outright bullying him and playing some really mean-spirited pranks on him. And he's sort of trying to deal with the fact that he wants to discipline them, but the more he tries to discipline them, the more they fight back and just say that, you're just some sensitive teacher who's not able to handle it, and so on. And he's just like, he doesn't know how to approach it, because for him, like I mentioned before, mischief and punishment go hand in hand. It's knowing that the punishment comes with it that makes it fun to dare to do the mischief. Did they really think that there was some low-down country out there where people could play tricks and then claim immunity from the consequences? This must be the way that those characters who borrow money off you and then refuse to pay it back get their start in life too. And yeah, so he's just like starting to realize that despite the fact that he's going away from Tokyo into this more traditional outback area, he's starting to see this different approach to having a social dynamic, and it's really screwing with him. He just can't quite figure it out. And a friend of his says, and that's why it'd be so easy for someone to take advantage of you in ways you've never even dreamed of. And he responds, no matter what anyone tries to do to me, I won't have anything to be afraid of as long as I'm honest. And the man responds, of course you won't. Nothing to be afraid of, but they'll still take advantage of you. In fact, your own predecessor got taken in, and that's why I'm warning you to be on your guard. There is a section where he gets criticized for going and eating noodles and just eating bowls of dumplings because it's seen as a disreputable area, and so they're trying to kind of criticize him for just wanting to go and indulge in this food. And then Red Shirt says, middle school instructors belong inherently to the upper stratum of society. This being the case, the entertainments that they pursue should not be of an exclusively material nature. To devote themselves entirely to such pursuits cannot help but exert a negative influence on their characters. Being human, however, they can scarcely be expected to endure the rigors of provincial life without engaging in diversions of some sort. It is appropriate, therefore, for them to engage in amusements of an uplifting and spiritual nature, such as fishing, reading works of literature, composing haiku or poems in the modern style, and the like. And yeah, just this sort of bourgeois, but it's this really weird thing. It's sort of this like middle upper class where it's like, come on, you're a middle school teacher. You're obviously not aristocracy or anything. They're making $40 a month. But it's this sort of subtle elitism and this emergence of the middle class and wanting to criticize people for having these, for not like trying to round up, I guess. This is a funny one-liner that I just wanted to mention. Kind of actually coming back, he said, haiku is either for masters like Basho or for guys like hairstylists. What business does a math teacher have fooling around with little poems about morning glories and the bucket at the well? And maybe that's all I'll talk about. There's not too much more to say without spoiling certain story beats, but I really enjoyed reading Botchan. It's very easy to read. You'll just smash it out in a couple of hours. And let me know if there are other works. I know that this has been talked about as not the strongest Sōseki work because it is an earlier work and he goes on to develop it, but to develop his style into maybe more nuance. And I know that there's not a whole lot of female characters of consequence except maybe Kyo and the Madonna, but I would be curious to read more of his style and to see how different it is. So yeah, feel free to recommend some other works by Natsume Sōseki. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.